He was the most feared man in Seoul, a mafia boss who had never once apologized to anyone, not to rivals, not to enemies, not even to the men who bled for him. But in the middle of a crowded airport, one woman with a cup of apple juice and a chocolate bar made him feel something no bullet ever had: shame. What happened next would destroy everything he thought he knew about power. Stay with me until the very end, because this story is going to break your heart before it puts it back together. If you're watching right now, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. And if you're new here, subscribe. You do not want to miss what comes next. The terminal at Incheon International was the kind of place that reminded Kang Jae-hyun why he hated public spaces. Too many people, too much noise, too much of everything pressing in from all directions. The announcements bleeding through the ceiling speakers, the rolling luggage clacking against polished floors, the perfume from the duty-free counters mixing with the exhaust-tinged air, still clinging to his coat from the tarmac. He had been in the air for 11 hours. His body felt like something that had been wrung out and dropped, but his face showed none of it. It never did. He walked with the kind of stillness that made crowds part without realizing they were doing it. Not because he was particularly tall, though he was. Not because he dressed extravagantly, though the charcoal suit he wore cost more than most people's monthly salary. It was the eyes. Dark, flat, and entirely without invitation. They swept the terminal like surveillance equipment, cataloging exits, faces, anything out of place. And they never softened. Not once. Minho Park walked half a step behind and slightly to his left, a leather portfolio pressed against his ribs, his voice a controlled murmur beneath the ambient noise of the terminal. Minho was 29, efficient to the point of being mechanical, and had learned in his first week of employment that the only acceptable pace around Kang Jae-hyun was the one Jae-hyun set. "The Busan shipment is being held," Minho said quietly. "Customs flagged 2 containers at the port. Seo's people say it's not random. Someone put pressure on the inspector. The working assumption is Director Lim's network." Jae-hyun said nothing. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The alliance meeting with the Daegu faction has been rescheduled to Thursday. They're asking for additional security assurances before Chairman Yoon will sit down again." "Yoon is scared," Jae-hyun said. His voice was low and even, a man commenting on weather. "Probably. Then he's useless to me right now." He shifted the strap of his carry-on. "Tell him Thursday is fine, and tell him I want the meeting in neutral space, not his building, not mine. The hotel on Tehran Row, private dining room, 2nd floor." "Understood." Minho typed something with his thumb without breaking stride. "There's also the matter of the quarterly review for the construction subsidiary. 3 of the board members are asking questions about the MAPO Development Fund, specifically the transfer records from—" He never finished the sentence. It happened in under 2 seconds. A figure appeared from the left, cutting across the pedestrian flow at a diagonal, moving fast, arms full. A pink gift box. A handbag slipping off one shoulder, and a paper cup, half full of apple juice, balanced in a grip that was already losing the fight. The collision was quiet, a soft grunt of impact, and then the cold, wet shock of apple juice spreading across Jae-hyun's chest, soaking through his shirt, reaching his skin. He stopped walking. Complete stillness. The kind that preceded very bad things. The woman who had hit him stumbled back, grabbed the gift box before it fell, and then looked up at him. Her breath was coming fast. She had clearly been running, or close to it. Her hair was a cloud of dark curls pulled back in a way that had mostly given up on structure. She wore a bright coral wrap dress, a little rumpled. Her eyes, when they found his face, went wide. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." The words came out before she had fully steadied herself. "I'm so sorry. I was watching the gate sign, and I wasn't looking where I was going, and—" She looked down at his shirt, at the spreading wet stain, and her expression dropped. "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I can... Do you have—" She was already reaching into her bag, pulling out a handful of napkins from some pocket. Here, please. The napkins were from a coffee chain. They were inadequate. They were also, in this moment, entirely beside the point. Jae-hyun had not moved. He had not taken the napkins. He was looking at her with an expression that had passed through surprise and arrived somewhere colder. He was tired. He was operating on 3 hours of broken sleep, an 11-hour flight, and the grinding pressure of an organization that was leaking from 3 different directions at once. His suit would need to be replaced, not cleaned, replaced, because the juice would pull the fabric. He could feel the cold spreading across his stomach, and something in him, something that had been compressed for days into a very small and very dense space, snapped loose. "Step back," he said. His voice was quiet. That was the thing about Kang Jae-hyun that people always remembered too late. He was most dangerous when his voice got quiet. She stopped trying to hand him the napkins. Her arm lowered. He looked at her, deliberately. The way he looked at invoices, at contracts, at things he was deciding whether to discard. His eyes moved from her face to her body and back again. Not with desire, not with anything warm, just with calculation and contempt. "Maybe," he said slowly, each word landing with careful weight, "if you ate less, you would take up less space and cause fewer problems for other people." The terminal didn't actually go silent. The announcements kept going, luggage kept rolling. But between them, in the 2 feet of air separating his cold contempt from her stillness, something happened that felt like silence. Amara Whitfield did not move. She had heard things like this before. Not exactly this, but close enough that some muscle in her, some old trained reflex, knew how to absorb the impact without crumpling. She had learned that reflex the hard way, over years, in boardrooms and airports and hotel lobbies, from men who decided in the first 3 seconds of looking at her that she was less than what she actually was. She looked at him, not with tears, not with anger, or not anger that showed. She looked at him with something that was worse, somehow, than either of those things. She looked at him with quiet, deliberate disappointment, the way someone looks at a thing that had potential and wasted it. Then she picked up the chocolate bar that had fallen from her bag during the collision. She put it back inside. She adjusted the pink gift box under her arm. She took a breath. "I hope your day gets better," she said, and she walked away. Jae-hyun watched her go. Minho stood slightly behind him, absolutely silent, his portfolio pressed tight against his body. He had learned that commenting on moments like this was not part of his job description. Jae-hyun looked down at his ruined shirt, at the translucent stain spreading across the charcoal fabric. He straightened his jacket. He started walking again. "The hotel on Tehran Row," he said. "Confirm it." "Yes, sir." They walked in silence, but something was wrong. He could feel it the way you feel a pebble in an expensive shoe, small, minor, entirely beneath the scale of everything else demanding his attention, and yet impossible to ignore. The image kept reasserting itself. Her face, just before she turned away. The way she'd looked at him. Not like he'd frightened her, not like he'd broken her, like he'd simply confirmed something disappointing about the world and she'd filed it away and moved on. He had said terrible things to enemies. He had used language as a weapon with precision and without guilt. It was part of the work. You needed people afraid of you, or they stopped respecting the architecture you'd spent years building, but she hadn't been an enemy. She'd been a woman with apple juice and a chocolate bar who was late for a gate. The armored car was waiting in the arrivals lane, black and impassive, engine running. The driver opened the rear door without being asked. Jae-hyun got in. Minho folded into the front passenger seat. The door closed and the terminal disappeared behind tinted glass. Minho resumed the briefing without being prompted. The Busan situation, the Daegu alliance, the construction subsidiary, Director Lim's quiet campaign to erode the eastern supply chain, a board member named Choi who had been making phone calls he shouldn't be making, a lawyer in Gangnam who needed to be reminded of his loyalties. Jae-hyun listened. He responded when responses were needed. His voice stayed level, his instructions precise. This was the work. This was what he was. But the back of the car felt very much like being trapped, and he didn't like what was in there with him. Her face, the napkins. The way she'd said, "I'm so sorry," genuinely, like she meant it, like she was worried about him. The man who was about to say something unforgivable to her. He pressed 2 fingers against his temple and looked out at the highway. "Pull her contact information," he said, cutting across whatever Minho was saying. Minho stopped. "I'm sorry?" "The woman. From the terminal." His voice was neutral, giving nothing away. "She dropped her boarding pass when she ran into me. I saw her name, Amara Whitfield. Pull whatever is publicly available." A beat of silence, professional, careful silence. "Any particular reason, sir?" Jae-hyun didn't answer. Minho didn't ask again. The car moved through Seoul's outskirts as the afternoon light flattened into the dull gold of early evening. Jae-hyun watched the city reassemble itself. The apartment towers, the signs, the streets he had spent 20 years learning the way a surgeon learns anatomy. He knew which neighborhoods moved money, which ones moved other things. He knew which bridges had cameras and which alleys didn't. He had built something here that most people couldn't see and couldn't dismantle, and he ran it with the kind of control that left no margin for sentiment. He was still thinking about her face when the car pulled into the underground garage beneath the Kang Group's primary office tower. The evening unfolded the way evenings always did when he returned from trips. A stack of physical documents waiting on his desk, a line of subordinates with updates, a dinner he would eat alone while reviewing financial models. The rhythm was so established, it was almost physical, like muscle memory. He moved through it without resistance. He was 3 hours into the evening, working through a set of contracts related to the Mapo development, when his personal phone, not the business line, the phone only his grandmother had the number for, rang. He looked at the screen. Theo Hye Ran. He answered before the second ring. "Halmeoni." "You're back," she said. Her voice was the same as it had always been, warm but with an authority underneath it that hadn't softened with age. Seo Hye-ran was 77 years old and had buried 1 husband, outlasted 3 doctors' predictions, and remained the only living person who could make Kang Jae-hyun stop what he was doing and sit down. "You didn't call when you landed." "The landing was fine." "That's not what I asked." He allowed himself a small pause. "How are you, Halmeoni?" Old, impatient, in that order. A beat. "I need you to come for dinner Thursday evening." "I have a meeting Thursday evening." "Reschedule it." He could have argued. With anyone else, he would have. "What's the occasion?" There was a quality to the silence that followed. Measured, deliberate. The silence of a woman who had arranged something and was now choosing how to reveal it. "I've invited someone," she said. "A woman. She's the granddaughter of my dear friend Miriam Whitfield, who I've known for 35 years. She's visiting Seoul for business, and No." His voice was flat. Not angry, just closed. "Jae-hyun, I don't do arrangements, Halmeoni. You know that. I know that you haven't allowed yourself to do anything in 15 years that wasn't about protecting your organization or building your position." Her voice was gentle and merciless at the same time. "And I know that you are going to be very alone inside that tower if you don't occasionally allow the world to reach you." He was quiet. He looked at the contracts in front of him. "Her name is Amara," his grandmother said. "She runs her own company, something in design and architecture, quite successful. Miriam is tremendously proud of her. She's flying out of Seoul on Saturday, and I would very much like you to have dinner together before she goes." The pen in his hand stopped moving. "What did you say her name was?" "Amara. Amara Whitfield." "Jae-hyun, are you—" "I'll be there," he said. "Thursday. What time?" A short pause, surprised maybe. Seo Hye-ran had expected more resistance. 7 o'clock, she said. "At Seore. I've reserved the private room." "Fine." After he hung up, he sat for a long time without moving. Amara Whitfield, CEO of what, exactly? He turned to his computer and typed the name into a search engine, something he almost never did from this terminal. Results came back immediately. Her company first, Whitfield Global Design, a New York-based firm with offices in London, Singapore, and now apparently Seoul. The website was clean and architecturally precise. The About section had a photograph of a woman standing in a design studio, curls pulled back, wearing a blazer the color of dark amber. He recognized her immediately. The pink gift box was not in the photograph. The coral dress was replaced with professional clothes. But it was her. The same face. The same quality of stillness that she'd had in the airport after he'd said what he'd said. Not broken, not diminished, just present. He looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he closed the laptop. He sat in his office with the contract spread across his desk and the city visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, and he thought about what kind of man looks at a woman who is apologizing to him, genuinely, openly apologizing, and responds by attacking the thing she cannot change in the next 5 seconds. He thought about the word powerful, which he had used to describe himself for so long that it had stopped having meaning. He thought about what Amara had said when she left. "I hope your day gets better." Not a curse, not a threat, just that. 5 words with more grace in them than he had managed in 20 years. He did not sleep well that night. He lay in the dark in his apartment on the 44th floor and stared at the ceiling and felt the pebble in the shoe that he could not shake loose. And what bothered him most, what he could not quite articulate even to himself, lying there alone in the city he controlled, was that she had left him no place to put his cruelty. She had taken it from him, not by fighting, by simply refusing to let it define her. Thursday was 4 days away. He did not know yet what he was going to say to her. What he knew, for the first time in a very long time, was that he needed to say something true. What he did not know, what he had no way of knowing as he lay in the dark, 4 days from a dinner arranged by an old woman who loved him despite everything, was that Amara Whitfield already knew his name. She had asked the airport staff, and she had spent 4 days deciding whether to show up at all. Amara had not told her grandmother she was considering skipping the dinner. She had not told anyone. That was the thing about being the kind of woman who held herself together in public. There was no one she needed to perform for in a Seoul hotel room at 11 o'clock at night, sitting on the edge of a bed in her socks, holding her phone and staring at a name she had looked up 4 days ago and not been able to stop thinking about since. Kang Jae-hyun. She had typed it into a search engine with one thumb, sitting in a plastic airport chair after the collision, still feeling the cold draft of humiliation moving through her chest. The results came back fast. Photograph first. A man in a dark suit at some kind of industry event, expression completely closed. The kind of composure that read either as discipline or emptiness, depending on how generous you were feeling. Business news. Construction subsidiaries. A conglomerate called Kang Group that had its hands in real estate, logistics, and 3 other sectors she recognized as covers for things that didn't get reported in business news. She wasn't naive. She had spent 15 years in rooms with powerful men in cities all over the world. She knew what adjacent meant when it appeared in enough financial disclosures. She put the phone down. She picked up the chocolate bar, the one she'd retrieved from the airport floor, the same one she'd been planning to eat on the cab ride to her hotel. She ate 3 squares of it standing at the window of her room, looking out at Seoul's nighttime sprawl, and she thought very carefully about the kind of woman she was versus the kind of woman the world kept trying to make her into. Her grandmother had called the next morning, excited in the way that Miriam Whitfield, 74 years old and sharp as a straight razor, got excited about certain kinds of things. The kind of excitement that was actually a plan already in motion. Hyeran's grandson, her grandmother had said, Jae-hyun. He runs the family business, very successful, very established. She says he needs someone who won't be intimidated by him, and that is, my darling, your entire personality. Amara had laughed. It was a real laugh, which she resented slightly. Gran, I'm in Seoul for a client presentation, not a setup. It's dinner, one dinner. She's reserved a private room, and she will be there herself, which means it is absolutely not a setup. It is simply 2 young people eating in the presence of 2 old women who love them. Amara had said she would think about it. She thought about it for 4 days. She thought about the airport. The cold precision of what he had said, not a burst of anger, not even raised volume, just deliberate and measured cruelty aimed at the part of her that had taken the longest to protect. She had built something around that part of herself over many years. Not armor exactly, more like architecture. You had to construct the right rooms in yourself so that the worst things people said could enter and then exit without taking anything structural with them. She had gotten very good at that construction. What she had not expected was for the blueprint to feel quite so fragile in a Seoul airport terminal. She went to the dinner. She told herself it was because of her grandmother. She told herself it was because Seo Hye-ran was someone her family respected, and declining would be a kind of rudeness she wasn't willing to perform. She told herself a lot of things in the cab on the way to the restaurant that she didn't fully believe. She wore the black dress, the one that felt like confidence without trying. She was 7 minutes late, unavoidable. The traffic near Gangnam was a solid wall. And when she was escorted to the private room by a staff member who moved with the deference of someone in a very expensive establishment, she stopped in the doorway for exactly 2 seconds to read the room before anyone inside it knew she was there. Seo Hye-ran was already seated, small and elegant, her white hair pinned precisely. She was laughing at something, which meant she was comfortable, which meant she had been there long enough to settle. Across from her, facing away from the door, was a man in a charcoal jacket with the kind of posture that didn't come from good habits. It came from years of needing to be unreadable. Amara knew those shoulders before he turned around. She stepped into the room. He heard her. He turned. For 1 second, neither of them performed anything. It was too fast for performance. His face moved through something. Recognition, then something more complicated. Something that sat in the jaw and the eyes simultaneously and wasn't easy to name, before the composure resettled. Hers stayed still. She had 4 days of preparation on him. She used all of it. "Amara," Seo Hye-ran said warmly, rising slightly, "we're so glad you came. This is my grandson, Jae-hyun." "Miss Whitfield," he said. His voice was different from the airport, flatter, more controlled, which paradoxically made it sound less controlled. "Mr. Kang," she said. She sat down. She put her napkin in her lap. She smiled at his grandmother and asked about her evening and listened to the answer with genuine attention because Seo Hye-ran had kind eyes and good posture and deserved to be listened to, and because focusing on the old woman gave Amara something to do with the next 3 minutes that didn't involve looking at the man across the table and deciding what she was going to do with the thing sitting between them. He was watching her. She could feel it the way you feel heat. Not dramatically, just present against the side of her face. She turned and looked at him directly. "Your grandmother tells me you just came back from overseas," she said. Neutral, conversational. "Japan," he said. "Business." "What kind?" A brief pause. "Construction partnership. Land development outside Osaka." She nodded as though this were interesting without indicating that she knew what adjacent meant. Dinner arrived in stages. Small plates, beautifully arranged, the kind of food that was designed to give people something to look at while they navigated each other. Seo Hye-ran guided the conversation with the skill of a woman who had been putting incompatible people at the same table for 50 years and knew exactly how much tension to let breathe and how much to redirect. She asked about Whitfield Global Design. Amara answered honestly. The Seoul Project, a mixed-use development near Seongsudong for a client she'd been working with for 2 years. The scope, the timeline, the particular challenge of designing spaces that felt human in a city that built fast and large. "Spaces that feel human," Seo Hye-ran repeated, with something warm and approving in her voice. "That's a lovely way to put it." "It's the only way that matters," Amara said. "You can make something structurally perfect and completely soulless. The soulless ones are the ones that empty out after 5 years. Across the table, something shifted in Jae-hyun's posture. "Your company motto," he said. It was the first thing he had volunteered since they sat down. His voice was careful, like he was handling something he didn't want to break. She looked at him. "What about it?" "If the world refuses to make room for you, build a place where you belong." He had it exactly right, word for word. "Did you write that yourself?" Amara held his gaze. "Yes." "When?" 5 years after I started the company." She took a sip of water. "Before that, I was still trying to fit into rooms that weren't built for me. That gets exhausting." He was very still, the kind of stillness that she recognized now as his version of paying full attention. Seo Hye-ran was quiet too, watching her grandson with the watchfulness of a woman who knew him completely and was hoping for something specific. Amara set her glass down. "Can I ask you something?" Jae-hyun looked at her. "When did you realize I was the same person?" she said. "From the airport." The table went very quiet. Seo Hye-ran's eyebrows moved slightly. Not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. Jae-hyun didn't look away from her. She had to give him that. "The night my grandmother called," he said. "She said your name." "And what did you do?" A pause. "I looked you up." "So you knew for 4 days," Amara said. Her voice was even. Not accusing, just establishing fact. "Yes." "And you came to this dinner anyway?" "Yes." "Why?" His jaw tightened. The muscles along the side of his face did something she watched happen and couldn't interpret fully. "Because I owe you something," he said. The directness of it surprised her. She had been prepared for deflection, for the management of the moment that powerful men were so practiced at. The pivot, the reframe, the way they converted accountability into a display of magnanimity. She had seen it 100 times. This was not that. She looked at him for a long moment. "Then say it," she said quietly. He held her gaze. Something in him was working. She could see it, the way you see effort in a face when someone is doing something that doesn't come naturally. Not false effort, real effort, the kind that costs something. "What I said to you," he started and then stopped, tried again. "In the airport. What I said was..." He exhaled once through his nose, very controlled, but she caught it. "It was cruel. And it had nothing to do with you. You were apologizing to me and I..." He stopped again. The silence in the private room was different from outside silences. Contained, specific. "You attacked me," Amara said. Not loud, just accurate. He didn't flinch from the word. "Yes. With the one thing you knew I couldn't immediately argue with in a room full of strangers." "Yes." Seo Hye-ran was very still. Her hands were folded on the table and she was looking at her tea and not at either of them, which Amara understood to be its own kind of grace. "I've heard variations of that my whole life," Amara said. She kept her voice level, but she felt the thing underneath it, old and specific and not entirely resolved no matter how well she had built her architecture. "From people who wanted to dismiss me before I could demonstrate why they shouldn't. It's efficient, I'll give it that." Something crossed his face. Not quite pain. The precursor to pain. The moment before the nerve fires. "I know." "You don't," she said, not unkindly. "You know that you said something wrong. That's different from knowing what it means to have it said to you in an airport by a stranger on a Tuesday afternoon because you spilled a drink." He was quiet. "What you did," she continued, "was decide in about 3 seconds that you knew everything about me that mattered, and then you said it out loud in front of people, like it was a verdict." She paused. "That's not anger, that's contempt." Jae-hyun looked at her. His eyes were doing the thing again. That flat surveillance quality from the airport, but different now. She was starting to understand that it wasn't coldness. It was the only mode of total attention he had. "You're right," he said. "I know," she said. A beat. Then Seo Hye-ran, without looking up from her tea, said very quietly, "He has never said those words in that order to another human being." Amara looked at the old woman. Hye-ran finally looked up, and her expression was dry and deeply fond simultaneously. "I'm simply providing context." Amara surprised herself by almost smiling. The food came again. Another course, something delicate with broth, and for a few minutes they let the meal do the work of managing the oxygen in the room. Jae-hyun ate without appearing to taste anything. Amara watched him sideways and thought about architecture again, about how you could tell what a building had been designed to withstand by looking at where the reinforcement was thickest. His was everywhere, which usually meant someone had gotten in through the foundation a long time ago, and the builder had never quite trusted the material the same way since. She didn't say that out loud. It wasn't earned yet. The dinner moved forward. Hye-ran asked about New York, about Amara's mother, about how Miriam was managing her garden since her hip surgery. Amara answered all of it, and gradually something loosened at the table. Not resolved, not fixed, but slightly less pressurized. Jae-hyun spoke more. Carefully, still, but more. He asked about the Seongsu-dong project. Real questions, structural ones, about materials and client brief and timeline negotiation. He knew enough about development to ask the second layer of questions, the ones past the surface of public information, which meant he had done research or had direct experience. She answered fully, because the questions deserve full answers. At one point he said, "The best buildings are the ones that make you feel like you were expected." She stopped. He said it without apparent awareness of how it landed, looking down at his plate, moving food with his chopsticks. "That's exactly right," she said. He looked up. Something passed between them that was brief and specific and not entirely comfortable, like two instruments that weren't supposed to be in the same key discovering they were. The dinner ended. Hye-ran embraced Amara with warmth, said something about Miriam that was loving and exasperated in equal measure, and excused herself with the timing of a woman who had gotten what she came for and was too practiced to oversell it. Which left two of them in the corridor outside the private room, winter air coming through the lobby entrance down the hall, the low sound of the restaurant behind them. Jae-hyun looked at her. "Can we do this again?" She stopped pulling on her coat. The warmth that had started, cautiously, to build in her over the course of the evening, she felt it recede slightly, not entirely, but enough. Because the question arrived too clean, too easy, as if the dinner had settled something it had only approached. "Have you noticed something?" she said. He looked at her, waiting. "You apologized for what you said," she told him. "But you haven't named what it was." "Not really." She kept her voice even. "You said it was cruel. You said it had nothing to do with me. Both true. But what you actually did, you looked at my body and you decided it was a problem. Not the spilled drink, not the collision, my body." She held his gaze. "Being plus size doesn't make me a hazard, Mr. Kang. It doesn't make me less careful or less competent or less deserving of the basic courtesy you'd extend to anyone else in that airport." His jaw was tight. He wasn't defending himself. She didn't know if that was discipline or actual understanding, and she needed it to be the latter before she gave him anything more. "I know what I said," he told her. "Do you know why it was different from just being rude?" A beat. He was working again. She could see it. "Because it wasn't about the inconvenience," he said slowly. "It was about deciding who you were from the outside, without asking." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's closer," she said. She buttoned the top of her coat. She picked up her bag. "I'm flying out Saturday morning," she said. "I have a full day tomorrow." He nodded once. She walked toward the lobby entrance. Stopped. Turned back once, briefly. "You said what you had to say tonight," she said. "That took something. I want you to know I heard it." A pause. "But an apology is the beginning, not the end." Then she went through the door and into the Seoul night, and the door swung closed behind her, and Jae-hyun stood in the corridor of an expensive restaurant alone, listening to the sound of it. He stood there longer than was necessary. His phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He didn't look at it. He was thinking about what she had said. Apology is the beginning, not the end. And he was thinking about how in every other domain of his life, beginning something was the easy part. He was very good at beginning things. He was very good at strategy and leverage and identifying what a situation needed and providing it with precision. He was thinking about how none of that infrastructure was useful here, how the thing she was asking for was not something he could organize or resource or delegate, and how that terrified him in a way that 12 hostile business negotiations and 2 actual assassination attempts had not managed to. His phone buzzed again. He pulled it out. Minho. The message was 3 lines. He read them once, and his entire body changed, not dramatically, but the way a temperature drops, invisible and immediate and total. Director Lim had not merely pressured the customs inspector in Busan. He had made contact with Chairman Yoon's people. Yoon had canceled Thursday, which meant the Daegu alliance was gone, which meant the eastern corridor of his supply chain was now exposed from 2 directions simultaneously, which meant someone had been coordinating against him for longer than he'd known, and the timeline he'd been working from was wrong, and the meeting on Tehran Row that he had told Minho to arrange was now a liability rather than a solution. He walked out of the restaurant into the cold night air, and his mind did the thing it always did under pressure. Split cleanly into compartments, cold and fast and precise. And in the front compartment was the crisis. And in the back compartment, the one he didn't have a name for yet, was a woman in a dark coat disappearing into the soul night, and the specific weight of having said something true to another person for the first time in longer than he could remember. He called Minho. "I know," Minho said before he could speak. "The Yoon cancellation just came through. I'm already pulling contingency. Get everyone in, tonight." His voice was operational now. The other thing sealed behind the compartment door, not gone, just contained. The Mapo office, 2 hours. "There's something else," Minho said. The quality of his voice changed slightly, a tightening that Jae-hyun recognized as Minho managing the delivery of information that was going to be bad. "Someone sent a package to the Busan warehouse. Our people found it during the customs delay, hidden in one of the legitimate containers." Jae-hyun was walking toward his car. He stopped. "What kind of package?" "Documents," Minho said. "Financial records, transfers, account numbers, names. Jae-hyun." And it was notable that Minho used his name, not his title, which happened only in the category of things that were genuinely serious. "There are records. Internal. Not the subsidiary layer, the actual accounts. Someone inside has been copying files." The night air was very cold against his face. Inside. The word sat in him like ice water. He had built this organization on the principle that loyalty was not assumed but constructed, through selection, through demonstration, through the kind of pressure that revealed character quickly and without ambiguity. He had believed for years that his inner circle was exactly what it presented itself as. Someone inside had just told him he was wrong. "Who has access to those account structures?" he said. His voice was completely flat. "6 people," Minho said. "Including me." A long silence. "Then get everyone in the room," Jae-hyun said, "and we will find out which of the 6 it isn't." He got in the car. The driver pulled out into traffic without being told the destination. The Mapo office was the contingency default. Everyone in the organization knew it. The city moved past the windows, lit and indifferent, and Jae-hyun sat in the back and felt the 2 things he was carrying. The crisis in the front compartment, sharp and actionable, and the other thing in the back, the thing without a name yet, that somehow felt equally urgent and entirely out of reach. And he understood, with the particular clarity that came to him only in genuine emergencies, that he was now at a point where both things required his full attention, and neither could wait for the other. He thought about what she had said. An apology is the beginning, not the end. He looked out at Seoul. He had approximately 90 minutes before he would walk into a room with 5 people, one of whom had been systematically dismantling everything he had built, and he would need to find out which one without letting the guilty party know he was looking. After that, if there was an after that, he was going to do something he had never done in his adult life. He was going to ask for help from someone who had every reason in the world to tell him no. The Mapo office was not an office in any conventional sense. It occupied the upper 2 floors of a building that, from the street, presented itself as a mid-tier logistics firm with a modest signage and the kind of unremarkable facade that discouraged curiosity. Inside, past the ground floor operation that was entirely legitimate and employed 17 people who believed they worked for a freight coordination company. The elevator required a separate key card and a biometric confirmation that had been installed 18 months ago after a security audit revealed 3 vulnerabilities in the previous system. Jae-hyun had overseen that audit personally. He arrived at the building at 11:43. The driver pulled into the underground access lane and stayed with the car. Jae-hyun took the internal stairwell rather than the elevator, old habit, the kind of redundancy that became reflex after enough years, and came up through the fire door on the upper floor to find the room already assembled. 5 people. They were seated around the central table in the main operations room, a space with no windows and the particular stillness of heavy soundproofing. The overhead lighting was flat and bright, the kind that left nowhere to hide expression. a good room for the kind of conversation that was coming. Minho was standing near the door. He handed Jae-hyun a physical folder as he entered. Printed pages, not digital, which meant Minho had already made the judgment that this information needed to stay off screens. Jae-hyun took the folder without opening it. He looked at the 5 people at the table. Byun-suk, 51, head of financial operations, 22 years in the organization. He had a heavy face, deep-set eyes, and the habitual stillness of a man who processed everything slowly and accurately. Lee Chae-won, 38, logistics coordinator for the Eastern Distribution Network. Sharp and fast, with the particular nervous energy of someone who was always 3 steps ahead of a conversation. She was tapping one finger against the table edge and stopped when Jae-hyun looked at her. Park Dae-jung, 44, legal affairs. Calm in the way that lawyers learn to be calm, not because they weren't afraid, but because they had trained themselves out of visible fear responses. Han Woo-bin, 33, security and internal operations, former military. He met Jae-hyun's gaze directly and held it, which was either innocence or a very good performance of it. And Kim Tae-soo, 47, Jae-hyun's second-in-command, 14 years. The man who had sat across from him at more difficult tables than any of the others, who knew the organization's architecture from the inside the way Jae-hyun knew it, not as an employee reading a chart, but as someone who had helped build the rooms. Jae-hyun stood at the head of the table. He did not sit. He opened the folder. Inside were the financial documents Minho's people had pulled from the Busan container. 12 pages. Account numbers, transfer records, internal naming conventions that were not public-facing, not the subsidiary layer, not the legitimate business accounts, but the actual structural accounts that sat beneath everything else, like load-bearing walls. The accounts that had no paper trail connecting them to Kang Group, that existed only through a layering system that Jae-hyun had designed himself 6 years ago with the help of exactly 3 people. 2 of those 3 people were in this room. He set the folder on the table and pushed it to the center. Nobody reached for it. Nobody looked at it except Lee Chae-won, who glanced down briefly and then back up, her face careful and unreadable. Someone in this building, Jae-hyun said, has been copying internal financial documents and routing them to a party outside this organization. His voice was the flat operational tone, the one with no temperature. The documents found in Busan were not the full set. They were a sample, which means whoever prepared them has access to more and has either already passed more or is waiting to. Silence. I'm not going to spend an hour asking each of you to convince me it wasn't you, he said. That's not how this works. What I'm going to do is tell you what I already know, and what I know will tell me who needs to say something and who doesn't. He picked up the folder again. He pulled out one page, a single transfer record, and slid it across the table toward Byun-suk. Account designation 7 Seong 4. Internal code established 3 years ago for the MAPO restructuring. Who assigned that designation? Byun-suk looked at the page. His heavy face didn't change. I did, he said. Standard coding protocol. It's in the restructuring file. Which file? Physical archive, level 2, digital backup, the restricted partition. Who has access to the restricted partition? Byun-suk paused. Myself, Minho, and... He stopped. Say it, Jae-hyun said. Tae-soo, Byun-suk said, without looking at Kim Tae-soo. The room was very quiet. Jae-hyun looked at his second-in-command. Kim Tae-soo was sitting with both hands flat on the table, his expression composed in the way it always was, but measured, present, giving almost nothing. He was a broad-shouldered man with close-cropped gray at his temples, and eyes that had always reminded Jae-hyun of a specific kind of intelligence, lateral, patient, and not easily surprised. He was not surprised now. That was the thing that registered first, before anything else, like a note struck wrong in a familiar piece of music. Every other person at the table had some version of tension in them, the bracing quality of people waiting for the ground to shift. Tae-soo was still. Not controlled still. Actually still. Tae-soo, Jae-hyun said. I know what you think, Tae-soo said. His voice was even. Tell me what I think. You think the access points lead to me. The coding designation, the restricted partition, 14 years of structural knowledge. He looked at Jae-hyun directly. No deflection. You're building a case in your head right now, and I'm the architecture of it. Am I wrong? A pause that lasted exactly long enough. No, Tae-soo said. The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Lee Chae-won's finger stopped moving against the table. Park Dae-jung's chin lifted fractionally. Han Woo-bin's expression went completely flat. Jae-hyun did not move. How long? He said. 8 months. The number hit him in a specific place. Not his chest, not his stomach, somewhere between, some organ that didn't have a name but registered betrayal as a physical event. 8 months. 8 months of sitting across from him in this room, in the Tehran Row conference rooms, in the car after difficult meetings, and all of that proximity had been, who, Jae-hyun said. The word came out stripped down to its bones. Tae-soo looked at him. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, or not only guilt. Something older, more complicated. Director Lim, he said. The room seemed to contract. Director Lim, who had been pressing the Busan customs inspector. Director Lim, whose network had been coordinating with Chairman Yoon. Director Lim, who had apparently been doing all of this with information being fed to him from inside, from the man who sat at Jae-hyun's right hand at every table for 8 months. Jae-hyun pulled out the chair closest to him and sat down. Not because he needed to sit, because something in him recognized that what was coming next required him to be at the same level as the person he was talking to, and standing over Tae-soo right now would make this about power, and this was not about power. This was about something much worse. Why? He said. Tae-soo's jaw moved once. His hand stayed flat on the table. My daughter, he said. Lim has her. The silence that followed was different from the previous silences. Denser. Jae-hyun stared at him. Na-yeon, Tae-soo said. His voice stayed level, but the name cracked something in the syllables that hadn't been there before. She's been living in Busan. She got involved with someone. I didn't know the details at first. By the time I understood who the man was, Lim had already made his position clear. He stopped. His throat moved. He wasn't asking me to cooperate. He was informing me that my daughter was already in a situation she couldn't remove herself from, and that the pace at which her situation improved or deteriorated would correspond directly to the usefulness of the information I provided. Byun-suk exhaled slowly through his nose. Lee Chae-won looked at the table. You should have come to me, Jae-hyun said. His voice was very quiet. I know. 8 months ago, you should have come to me the night it started. I know. Tae-soo's composure was beginning to develop fault lines, not dramatically, but Jae-hyun had known this man for 14 years and knew where his face kept its weight. I couldn't... Jae-hyun, if I came to you, you would have moved on Lim immediately, and Na-yeon was... He stopped. She is 26 years old. She didn't know who she was involved with. She made a mistake, and he used it. And instead of bringing it to me, Jae-hyun said, you gave him 8 months of the organization's financial architecture. I gave him enough to keep her safe. You gave him enough to route through Yoon's network and collapse the Eastern Corridor. His voice didn't rise. It was more frightening that it didn't rise. You gave him enough to walk into Busan Customs and hold our shipments. You gave him the coordinates of the entire structure, Tae-soo. Not enough to keep a girl safe. Enough to dismantle everything. Tae-soo closed his eyes. When he opened them, the composure was still there, but thinner now, worn through in places. I know what I gave him, he said. I know exactly what I gave him. I've known for 6 months that it had gone too far and I couldn't find the door back. Jae-hyun sat with that for a moment. 14 years. The man who had known where every body was buried, metaphorically and otherwise, who had been in the room when decisions were made that no one outside this organization would ever hear about, who had been the most stable fixed point in a world that Jae-hyun had spent 20 years building on shifting ground. He thought about the word foundation, about load-bearing walls, about a building that looked structurally intact until the single central column gave way. Where is she now? He said. Yeon. Still in Busan, Tae-soo said. An apartment near the port. Lim's people have a man outside. Jae-hyun looked at Han Woo-bin. How quickly can you get a team to Busan? Woo-bin straightened. 3 hours. Maybe less. Do it. He looked back at Tae-soo. Your daughter comes out of Busan tonight. That part is done. Tae-soo's expression broke open, briefly, in a way that was almost unbearable to watch, the fracture of a man who had been holding something at an enormous weight for 8 months and felt it shift. And then he pulled it back and pressed his hands flat against the table and breathed. Jae-hyun. Don't, Jae-hyun said. Not cruel, just final. I'm not doing this because we're finished. I'm doing it because she's not responsible for what you did, and I won't leave her there while we sort this out. He paused. But after tonight, Tae-soo, you and I will have a very different conversation. Tae-soo nodded once. He looked like a man who had just set down something that had been breaking his spine and didn't know yet whether relief or reckoning was waiting on the other side. The room reorganized itself quickly after that, the way rooms do when action becomes available and action is easier than sitting with the weight of what was just said. Woo-bin stepped out to make calls. Minho moved to the secure terminal in the corner. Park Dae-jung started sketching containment options for the documents that had already left the building. Lee Chae-won pulled up the Eastern Corridor maps and started identifying which nodes were now compromised. Jae-hyun stayed seated. He looked at the folder of documents in front of him. His own organization's internal architecture, photocopied and routed to an enemy, used as leverage and as weapon. And he understood that the problem was not just the exposure. The exposure was the surface. The problem underneath it was that Director Lim had held this material for 8 months and had not used it to make a single decisive move, which meant he was waiting, which meant the documents in Busan were not the action. They were the announcement. He was saying, I have this. I have had this. And now I am letting you know. That was a specific kind of signal. It wasn't an attack. It was an invitation to negotiate, delivered through the language of demonstrated capability. Lim was not trying to destroy the organization. He was trying to reposition inside it, or above it. Jae-hyun thought about the Daegu alliance, about Chairman Yoon canceling Thursday, about the customs hold in Busan, and the documents in the container and the 8 months of quiet information transfer. He thought about the architecture of it, the patience of it, and he felt a reluctant and cold acknowledgement of the intelligence that had assembled this. Lim was not a blunt instrument. He had built this quietly, incrementally, never triggering a visible alarm, and had chosen his moment of revelation with precision. The problem, for Jae-hyun specifically, was that he had 2 crises now, and they required contradictory responses. The organizational crisis required him to be exactly what he had always been: decisive, cold, capable of moving against a coordinated external threat with the kind of speed and ruthlessness that had kept the organization intact for 2 decades. And the other thing, the thing in the back compartment, the one without a name yet, required something he had no existing muscle for. He pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen for a moment. He didn't have her number. He had looked up her company, her public profile, her website. He did not have a direct line because he had not asked for one and she had not offered it. And the dinner had ended with her saying what she'd said and walking out into the Seoul night. He called his grandmother. Hyeran answered on the 3rd ring, her voice alert. She had clearly not been sleeping, which was either intuition or insomnia, both equally possible. Jae-hyun. I need Amara Whitfield's number, he said. A pause. It's almost 1 in the morning. I know. Is everything all right? No, he said. He hadn't planned to say that. It came out directly. Another pause, different from the first one, warmer, more careful. Her number, his grandmother said. Yes. Hold on. She sent it through by text. He read the number twice and then opened a new message thread. He looked at the empty text field for a long moment. In the background, Minho was talking through the Busan logistics with Woo Bin. Lee Chae-won's voice moved through the logistical chess of the Eastern Corridor containment. The room was full of the specific productive noise of a crisis being managed. He typed, This is Kang Jae-hyun. I apologize for the hour. He stopped, deleted it. Tried again. I need to tell you something. I'd rather say it in person, but I don't want to wait until morning. He looked at that for a long moment. Then Minho appeared at his shoulder, and the expression on Minho's face was the one that had preceded every genuinely terrible piece of information in the 3 years they had worked together. The controlled blankness of a man preparing the delivery of something that required the recipient to be steady. What? Jae-hyun said. The documents in the Busan container, Minho said quietly. Our people did a full inventory. There was a second layer underneath the financial records. Jae-hyun waited. Photographs, Minho said. Surveillance photographs, time-stamped over the last 48 hours. He paused. Of Ms. Whitfield, her hotel, the restaurant tonight, the street outside. Jae-hyun went very still. Lim's people were watching the dinner, Minho said. The photographs are there as a message, same as the documents. Not an action, a signal. He lowered his voice. He knows about the connection between you and the Whitfield family. He knows about the grandmother arrangement. Jae-hyun, if he decides she's useful as leverage. He's not going to get that far, Jae-hyun said. The words came out flat and total, the way a door closes. He looked down at his phone, at the unfinished message in the text field. The screen was still lit. He deleted what he had written. He typed, You're in danger. I need you to trust me for the next hour. I'll explain everything. Please don't leave your hotel. His thumb hovered over the send button. This was the line. He understood that with complete clarity, sitting in a windowless room in Mappo at 1 in the morning with his organization compromised from the inside, and an enemy who had just announced himself through photographs of a woman who had absolutely nothing to do with any of this, except that he had said something unforgivable to her in an airport 11 days ago, and had spent every day since then carrying the weight of it toward something he hadn't fully understood until right now. If he sent this message, he was pulling her into his world, the world she hadn't asked about and didn't know the full dimensions of, the world that had surveillance photographs of her walking into a restaurant and timestamps, and the particular language of men who used people as pieces. If he didn't send it, and Lim moved before morning, he pressed send. Then he put the phone face down on the table and looked at Minho. Get me everything on Director Lim's personal security arrangements, he said. Not his professional structure, his personal, where he sleeps, who's with him, what he has around him when he's not working. His voice was completely level. Because tonight changes what this is. He had her followed. That's not negotiation anymore. Minho nodded and moved. Jae-hyun sat in the flat, bright light of the windowless room and waited for his phone to light up with her response. And he thought about the word protection and how for 20 years he had applied it to structures, to organizations, to supply chains and financial accounts and the men who worked beneath him. He had never had to apply it to someone who didn't know they needed it. He had never had to apply it to someone who had looked at him across a dinner table 4 hours ago and told him, with the particular clarity of a person who had learned the hard way what she was worth, that an apology was only the beginning. The phone lit up. He turned it over. Her message was 4 words. What did you do? Not a question mark. 4 words, flat and certain, from a woman who was already 3 steps ahead of his explanation and had already understood, in the 40 seconds since his message arrived, that whatever had come through her hotel room door in the form of a buzzing phone at 1 in the morning was going to change the shape of the next several hours of her life. He started typing. He had no idea yet whether she would stay in that hotel room, whether she would trust him. Whether the thing that had started in a crowded airport terminal with spilled apple juice and an unforgivable sentence had built enough of a foundation. In 11 days, 2 staged encounters, 1 honest dinner, and the specific quality of a silence that happened when 2 people who were not supposed to understand each other did, to hold the weight of what he was about to ask her to carry. He had built entire organizations on worse foundations. He typed, It's not what I did, it's what I am. And I should have told you that before tonight. He pressed send. And then Kang Jae-hyun, who had never in his adult life asked anyone for anything that could be refused, sat in a windowless room in Mappo and waited to find out if the most important message he had ever sent was going to be answered or left unread by a woman who had every reason in the world to close the phone and call the front desk for a cab to the airport. Her response came 8 minutes after his second message. 8 minutes was a long time when you were sitting in a windowless room in Mapo counting the seconds between one crisis and another. Jae-hyun knew this because he felt each of those minutes move through him with the specific weight of things that could not be controlled or accelerated. The same quality as waiting for a verdict, or for a name to surface in an interrogation, or for a phone to ring after you had done something irreversible. He was looking at the phone when it lit up. She had written, "I'm awake. Room 1408. Come here and explain it yourself. I'm not reading this over text." He read it twice. Then he stood up. Minho was across the room with his back turned, talking quietly into his earpiece. Jae-hyun crossed to him and put a hand briefly on his shoulder, a contact Minho registered by half turning, and said, "Keep the Busan team moving. I need Woo Bin to have a secondary unit ready for my location within 20 minutes of a call. Not the hotel lobby. Street level. Discreet." Minho looked at him. "You're going to her?" "Yes." Jae-hyun. A pause, precise and careful. "If Lim's people are still watching the hotel, then they'll see me walk in," he said. "Which is fine. I'm not hiding from him anymore. Tell Woo Bin 20 minutes on my call." Minho nodded. He didn't argue further, which was one of the things that made him indispensable. The hotel was 12 minutes from the Mapo office by car, a boutique property in Yongsan, the kind that catered to international business travelers, with the specific combination of discretion and service that justified the rate. Jae-hyun's driver took Namsamro and hit every light green, which felt either like luck or like the city offering one small thing in his direction. He sat in the back and watched Seoul pass outside and ran the Lim problem through his mind in the operational compartment, building the response structure, timing the pieces, identifying what could move tonight and what needed to wait for daylight and legal cover. In the other compartment, the one he still didn't have a name for, he was thinking about what he was going to say to a woman in room 1408 who had received a message at 1 in the morning telling her she was in danger because of him, and had responded not by panicking, not by calling the front desk, but by telling him to come explain himself in person. He was aware that he found this admirable was too small a word. He kept coming back to it anyway. The hotel lobby was quiet at this hour, marble floors and low lighting, and one staff member at the front desk who looked up as Jae-hyun entered and then looked down again with the practiced discretion of someone trained to unsee certain things. He took the elevator to the 14th floor without stopping. The corridor was carpeted and silent. Room 1408 was at the far end. He knocked. She opened the door almost immediately. She had not been sleeping, or she had been sleeping and had gotten up fast enough that it didn't show. She was wearing a dark green sweater and jeans, socked feet, and her hair was down, the curls loose around her face. She looked at him the way she had looked at him across the dinner table, directly, without flinching, reading him for information. She stepped back and let him in. The room was neat in the specific way of someone who used hotel rooms efficiently. Laptop open on the desk, a notebook beside it with handwriting he couldn't read from the door, a jacket folded over the chair. The overhead light was off. 2 lamps. It made the room feel like a place people actually lived in rather than passed through. She didn't sit down. She stood near the window with her arms crossed, not defensively, more like the posture of someone bracing for a run of bad weather. "Tell me," she said. He told her. All of it. He told her about Director Lim, the 8 months of information transfer, the documents in the Busan container. He told her about Tae-soo. Not everything, but enough. He told her about the surveillance photographs, the timestamps, her hotel, the restaurant from 2 hours ago. He told her what the photographs meant as a signal and what they could mean as an escalation. He stood in the middle of a hotel room in Yongsan at 1:30 in the morning and told a woman he had met 11 days ago the functional architecture of the thing he was, and watched her face while he did it. She didn't interrupt. She listened the way she had listened at dinner, completely, with the quality of someone who was assembling information in real time and not performing any reaction until the full picture was in. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. "The photographs," she said. "Of me specifically. Not the restaurant. Me." "Yes. That's not random intelligence gathering," she said. He's identified me as a potential pressure point. Yes. She looked at him steadily. Because of the dinner. Because of the connection to my grandmother. And now, presumably, because of whatever his people have been watching since the airport. He paused. The dinner confirmed it. She took a breath through her nose, slow and controlled. He could see her processing the specific anger of someone who had just been told that their safety had become a variable in someone else's power calculation, and that the someone else currently standing in their hotel room was the reason for it. How immediate is the risk? She said. Tonight, low. He made a signal. He wants a response, not a confrontation. Not yet. He looked at her. But I'm not willing to manage your safety on probably. She uncrossed her arms. She turned slightly toward the window and looked out at the city. The lights, the late-night traffic moving below, Seoul at 2 a.m, doing what Seoul did, which was continue without pause regardless of what was happening in the rooms above it. My flight is Saturday, she said. I know. It's Thursday now, technically Friday. She turned back. What do you need from me? The question landed strangely. He had not expected it to be the question. He had expected anger, reasonably. He had expected the accusation that was earned, that she had arrived in Seoul for a business presentation and a family dinner and was now standing in her hotel room at 2 a.m, being told that a criminal organization's internal power struggle had attached itself to her without her consent. What she asked was, what do you need? He looked at her for a moment. I need you to move hotels tonight, somewhere not connected to your original booking. I have a property in Iriwan. Secure, private, my grandmother has stayed there. No connection to the Kang group on paper. She looked at him. I'm not asking you to trust me because of what I said at dinner, he said. I'm asking you because you are in a situation you didn't create, and I am the one who created it. And the least I can do is put the right structure around you while I fix it. A long pause. One condition, she said. Name it. I'm not a person who disappears into a safe house and waits, she said. If you tell me what's happening, I stay informed. Not managed. Informed. I'm not a package you're protecting. He held her gaze. Understood. Then let's go, she said. She moved to the desk, closed the laptop, picked up the notebook. Efficient. No wasted motion. She had packed the essentials before he'd knocked. He saw the small bag near the chair that hadn't been visible when he came in. She had been ready before he arrived. He felt something shift in his chest, not dramatically, just a quiet internal movement, like a door opening onto a room he had forgotten was there. They were in the car within 7 minutes of her agreeing. His driver knew the Itaewon property. Jae-hyun put a call through to the building manager, a man who did not ask questions and was compensated accordingly, and the apartment on the 4th floor was unlocked and lit by the time they arrived. It was a clean, well-maintained space, 3 rooms, current utilities, a kitchen with food in it, because the building manager kept every unit stocked. Anonymous in the specific way of properties that were maintained for use without a visible owner. Amara walked through it once, checked the windows. He noticed this, the systematic check, she was thorough, and came back to the main room and stood with her bag still on her shoulder. Okay, she said. Now tell me what you're going to do about Lim. He was still pulling his jacket off. He stopped. You don't need... Jae-hyun. Her voice was level. You told me I'd be informed. I'm asking to be informed. He looked at her for a moment. Then he sat down on the couch and told her the operational plan, not the details that would put her at risk to know, but the structure. Lim had announced himself, which meant Lim was ready to negotiate, which meant there was a window, narrow, time-sensitive, to control the terms of that negotiation before Lim decided the window had closed and moved to the action phase. The action phase was what they were both trying to prevent. You want something, Amara said. She had sat down across from him, the notebook open on her knee, which she apparently used as a thinking tool because she was making marks in it as he spoke. He spent 8 months building leverage. He didn't spend 8 months building leverage just to burn it. He wants a seat. Jae-hyun looked at her. Yes. So give him a seat, she said. A real one, with real access, but to something. Just not to the structural accounts. She looked up from the notebook. You can't fight a war on 3 fronts simultaneously. Your own organization's breach, Lim's external pressure, and Yoon's defection. You close one of those tonight by making Lim an offer that's better than the war option. The room was quiet. You've done this before, he said. Not a question. Restructured organizations under pressure? Yes. She held his gaze. Different industry, same geometry. He thought about that geometry. He thought about Lim, who was patient and lateral and had built this over 8 months without triggering an alarm, and who understood that the most powerful position was always the one that made the other party come to you. Lim was waiting for a call. He had been waiting for a call since the Busan package was found. I need my phone, Jae-hyun said, and reached for it. What happened in the next 4 hours was the kind of thing that had no single dramatic moment. It was compound, accumulative, built from a series of decisions and calls and silences that assembled themselves into a structure only visible in retrospect. Woo Bin's team reached Busan at 3:47 and extracted Na-yeon from the apartment near the port without incident. The man outside hadn't been expecting a removal operation at that hour, which was the point. Na-yeon was 26 years old and frightened and exhausted. And when Woo Bin's people called Jae-hyun to confirm the extraction, the first thing Na-yeon asked was whether her father knew she was out. Woo Bin relayed this. Jae-hyun told him to tell her yes. It was the truth. Jae-hyun called Lim at 4:15. He made the call from the apartment in Itaewon, sitting at the kitchen table with the city dark outside and Amara at the far end of the table with her laptop, working on something that appeared to be the Seongsu-dong presentation, giving him the privacy of distance without leaving the room. Director Lim answered on the second ring. You found the package, Lim said. His voice was the practiced neutrality of a man who had been waiting for this call and was not going to let the relief of it show. Yes, Jae-hyun said. And the photographs? Yes. A pause. Lim let the pause sit, testing weight, testing temperature. I want to discuss terms, Jae-hyun said. Another pause. Different quality from the first one, surprised maybe beneath the control. He had expected to be the one proposing discussion. I'm listening, he said. Not on the phone, Jae-hyun said. This afternoon, 2 o'clock. The Tehran Row Hotel, private dining, second floor. Just the two of us? You can bring one person, so will I. A silence that ran about 4 seconds. Fine, Lim said. Jae-hyun ended the call. He set the phone on the table. He was aware that his pulse was elevated, not dramatically, just present, the body's honest report on the state of things. He pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose and held them there for a moment. You got him, Amara said from the end of the table. He looked up. She hadn't been looking at her laptop. She'd been watching him. The pause after you said terms, she said. He expected you to come out firing. You came out asking to talk. That's the right move. He's already off the script he prepared. He looked at her across the kitchen table at 4 a.m. and thought about what it meant that the most useful strategic observation he had received in the last 12 hours had come from a woman he had insulted in an airport 11 days ago. Get some sleep, he said. I'll take the couch. She looked like she was going to argue. Then she looked at him, the full reading look, the one that went several layers down, and apparently decided the argument wasn't worth it at 4 a.m. 2 hours, she said, then I want to know what you're going to offer him. She went to the bedroom. The door didn't fully close. She left it 3 inches open, which he understood to be a statement of some kind. Not trust exactly. The architecture of someone who was deciding about trust on a live timeline. He lay on the couch and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep. At 6:30, the city started coming back to life outside the apartment windows. He heard her moving in the bedroom, water running, the particular sounds of someone getting themselves organized. He sat up. He had not slept, but he felt sharper than he had at midnight, which was a quality of pressure he recognized, the body's response to a situation that would not permit deterioration. She came out at 6:45 with her hair pulled back and her face washed clean and sat down at the table with the notebook and a cup of coffee she had made from the kitchen supplies and looked at him with the directness he had stopped being surprised by. Tell me what you're offering Lim, she said. He told her. She listened. She pushed back on 2 points, one about the timeline, one about the scope of the access he was willing to formalize, and both pushbacks were right. He incorporated them. She didn't react to this with satisfaction, just move forward, which was one of the things about her that kept doing something unexpected to the architecture of how he was used to functioning. At 9 o'clock, Minho arrived at the apartment with physical documents and the specific expression of a man who had not slept and was choosing to treat that as irrelevant. He stopped when he saw Amara, looked at Jae-hyun. Jae-hyun held his gaze without explanation, and Minho, being Minho, moved on without requiring one. The three of them spent the next 4 hours preparing for the 2 o'clock meeting. Amara was not in the room as a decoration. She reviewed the document structure, identified 2 clauses that would not hold under pressure, rewrote them in language she said was both cleaner and harder to interpret against its intent. When Minho looked at the revisions, he looked at Jae-hyun again. Different from the first look, this one was something closer to acknowledgement, and said, "She's right about the second clause." "I know," Jae-hyun said. At 1:40, the car brought them to Tehran Row. Amara was not coming into the meeting. This was not discussion. It was the one point on which he was inflexible, and she had accepted it because she was practical, and because, he understood, she knew she had already contributed the structural elements that mattered. She got out of the car with him in the hotel's side entrance and stood on the pavement in the cold afternoon air, and she looked at him with the expression he had first seen in the airport. Not the hurt one, the other one, the one that came after, the one that assessed him for what he was rather than what he presented. "You have the architecture right," she said. "Don't let him renegotiate the timeline in the room. That's where he'll push." He looked at her. I know you know." A pause. "I just wanted to say something useful instead of good luck." He felt the thing in his chest again, the door opening onto the room he had forgotten. He wanted to say something. He opened his mouth, and the words were there, actual words, which was unusual enough that it almost surprised him. "When this is done," he said, "I owe you more than an apology." She looked at him for a moment. Then quietly, something shifted in her face. Not a smile exactly, more like the expression of someone watching a wall come down one brick at a time and deciding that the view on the other side might be worth the wait. "Go fix your organization," she said. He went. The private dining room on the second floor of the Tehran Row Hotel was the same room he had proposed for the Yoon meeting that never happened. Round table, 2 chairs prepared per side. White tablecloth, no centerpiece, the room stripped to its functional minimum by the manager who understood that decorative elements in this kind of meeting were obstacles. Director Lim arrived at 1:58. He was a compact man in his mid-50s with the kind of controlled physical presence that came from decades of operating in rooms where the wrong body language could end careers. He wore a dark suit, no tie, and he brought one person, a lawyer named Shin that Jae-hyun recognized from 3 previous encounters, a man who said very little and missed nothing. Jae-hyun was already seated. Minho was in the chair to his right. Lim sat down across from him and looked at him with the particular quality of a man who had spent 8 months building toward this moment and was managing the specific discipline of not letting that show. "You moved fast on Busan," Lim said. "Nayeon is not part of this," Jae-hyun said. "She never was." Lim's expression moved fractionally. "I protected her." "You used her," Jae-hyun said, flat and final. "We're not going to debate that. It's done. She's out. Now we talk about what you actually want." A pause. Lim looked at the folder that Minho placed on the table. He looked at it without reaching for it. "What's in that?" "A proposal," Jae-hyun said. "A real one. Not a conversation about going back to where we were. Neither of us wants that. A proposal for a structural repositioning that gives you what you've been building toward without requiring either of us to burn the other down to get there." Lim was still. The lawyer Shin had a pen in his hand and was looking at nothing. "You want legitimacy," Jae-hyun said. "Not just money. Not just access. You want a seat that exists on paper, with weight, that can't be removed when the political environment shifts." He held Lim's gaze. "I can give you that. There's a holding structure connected to the Mapo development, fully legitimate, publicly registered, with board access and documented governance. It's a seat that has real teeth, and it costs you the documentation you've been sitting on. Lim looked at him for a long moment. All of it? Lim said. All of it. Every copy. Verified destruction, witnessed by Shin. He paused. And you pull back from Yun. Whatever you told him, you untell it. The Daegu alliance comes back to the table. The room was very quiet. Lim reached for the folder. He opened it. He read in the precise way of a man who was not going to let any expression onto his face until he had read every word, and Jae-hyun sat across from him and held absolutely still and breathed through the waiting with the quality of a man who had spent 20 years learning that the most important move in any high-stakes room was to be the one who moved last. Lim turned the last page. He set the folder down. He looked at Jae-hyun across the white tablecloth. There's one thing not in here, Lim said. Jae-hyun waited. The woman, Lim said. The American. Whitfield. Every muscle in Jae-hyun's body went still. Not the controlled stillness of strategy. The stillness of something animal and protective that had nothing to do with the organization, nothing to do with the documentation, nothing to do with any of the architecture he had spent 20 years building and the last 12 hours defending. She's not part of this conversation, he said. His voice was very quiet. She became part of it, Lim said. The moment you walked into a restaurant with her and my people had cameras on the table. He paused, not threateningly, almost curiously. You've never done that before. Brought someone personal into proximity with business. You're too careful. He tilted his head slightly. She matters to you. Jae-hyun looked at him. I want assurance, Lim said, that the repositioning is real. Not a holding structure you dissolve in 6 months once you have the documentation back. She's the assurance. She stays visible, connected to your public-facing life. If something happens to the agreement, I still have the photographs and I still have the story of the American CEO who walked into the Korean criminal organization through a grandmother's dinner party. The thing that went through Jae-hyun in that moment was not anger. It was past anger. It was the specific quality of a man who has just had the thing he was most trying to protect named out loud by the person who could use it. He looked at Lim across the table, and he understood, with cold and complete clarity, that there was only one move left. He could protect the organization, or he could protect Amara. The version of him that had walked into this room an hour ago would have known which one came first. The version of him that had lain on a couch in an Itaewon apartment at 4 a.m, listening to a woman leave a bedroom door 3 inches open because she was deciding about trust on a live timeline, was not entirely sure that version of himself still existed in the same way. He looked at Lim. He put both hands flat on the table, and he said the thing that would change everything. Not because it was strategic, not because it was calculated, but because for the first time in 20 years of sitting in rooms like this one, the true answer and the right answer were exactly the same. She's not a term, Jae-hyun said. The words came out quiet. No heat in them. The particular quietness that was not calm but something beneath calm. Bedrock. The place you reached when everything constructed above it had been stripped away. Lim looked at him across the white tablecloth, waiting. I'm not going to negotiate with her name in the room, Jae-hyun said. So take it out. That's not how this... Take it out. Still quiet. Still without heat. Because what you're proposing is that I allow a woman who has nothing to do with this organization to become a permanent piece of leverage in a business arrangement. And I'm telling you that's not a term I'll agree to today, or 6 months from now, or after whatever you think you can build with those photographs. He looked at Lim directly. And the reason I'm telling you this clearly, instead of finding a way around it, is because I'm done finding ways around things. The lawyer Shin had stopped writing. He was looking at the table with the expression of a man who recognized that the nature of the meeting had just changed and was adjusting his assessment accordingly. Lim was very still. The photographs exist regardless of what you agree to. I know. If the arrangement breaks down, then the arrangement breaks down, Jae-hyun said, and you do what you do with the photographs, and I deal with that when it happens. He leaned forward slightly. But I'm not going to sit across from you and put her name on a document as collateral. That's the line. A silence that ran long enough to be uncomfortable. Lim looked at him. Not with anger, with something more like assessment. The lateral patient intelligence that had spent 8 months building this structure was now running a different calculation, reading him, trying to determine whether this was negotiating theater or something that was actually going to hold. "You understand what you're giving up," Lim said slowly. "Taking her off the table means I have less reason to protect the terms." "You have every reason to protect the terms," Jae-hyun said, "because what's in that folder is the best offer you're going to get from me, and you know it. The board seat is real. The governance structure is documented and public. It's what you built 8 months for." He held Lim's gaze. "I'm not adding a person to that, so decide if the rest of it is enough." Another silence. Longer than the first. Lim reached for the folder again. He read the second page, which he had already read, with the focused attention of a man who was now reading it differently. Not for information, but for weight, testing whether the structure beneath it would hold the new terms he was now constructing in his head. He set it down. "The Daegu situation," he said. "Yoon." "I'll handle Yoon," Jae-hyun said. "You pull back from his network and I'll handle the rest." "Timeline?" 72 hours from signing. Lim looked at his lawyer. Shin gave a fractional nod, barely perceptible, the nod of a man confirming something they had already discussed before the meeting. Lim looked back at Jae-hyun. "The photographs," Lim said. "I'll hold them, not destroy them. That's my term." Jae-hyun thought about this for 3 seconds. He understood what holding rather than destroying meant. It was Lim maintaining a residual piece of leverage without deploying it. A cold piece rather than a clean one. It was not what he had wanted. It was real. "Held," he said. "Not deployed. Not copied further." Shin witnesses that condition. Lim inclined his head slightly. They signed at 2:54 in the afternoon. No handshake. The signatures were enough. Minho collected the copies, Shin collected his, and the 4 men stood from the table with the specific relief of people who have avoided a war and are too experienced to mistake that for victory. Lim moved toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. He looked back at Jae-hyun with an expression that was difficult to read. Not warm, not cold, somewhere between them. The expression of a man who had just learned something he hadn't expected to learn from an adversary. "The woman," Lim said. "Not a threat. Almost conversational. She's different from what I expected." Jae-hyun looked at him. "Yes," he said. "She is." Lim left. The room was quiet. Minho exhaled through his nose, a controlled, precise exhale that was as close as he ever came to expressing relief. He began organizing the documents. Jae-hyun stood at the table and looked out the window at the Tehran Road traffic, the afternoon light flat and gray, and he felt the specific weight of the last 18 hours settle into him all at once, not dramatically, just as exhaustion, the body's honest accounting. "Woo Bin," he said. "Already texted," Minho said. "Na Yeon is at a private facility in Mapo. Tae-soo has been informed. She's okay." He nodded. "And Yoon?" Minho said. "I'll call him tonight." He turned from the window. "Set it up for tomorrow. His location this time. Let him feel like he has the table. He'll be easier." "And Tae-soo?" The name sat in the room differently from the others. Jae-hyun put his jacket back on, took his time with it. "Tomorrow," he said. "After Yoon." He went back to the car. He sat in the back and looked at his phone. He had one message from a number he now knew without having to check the name. How did it go? 2 hours ago, she had sent it. While he was signing documents across a table from a man who had spent 8 months systematically dismantling his organization. She had been sitting somewhere, the apartment in Itaewon presumably, with her notebook and her laptop and the coffee she had made from the building manager's kitchen supplies, and she had sent 2 hours ago. How did it go? He typed, "It's done. I'm coming back." He put the phone in his pocket. When the car pulled up to the Itaewon building, he sat for a moment before getting out. Not hesitation, preparation. He had spent the last 4 hours in the operational compartment, which was the compartment he knew, the one with established protocols and measurable outcomes, and the specific clarity of problems that could be solved by applying the right amount of force in the right direction. What was waiting upstairs required a different kind of presence. He went up. She opened the door before he knocked. She had heard the elevator. She looked at him the way she had looked at him at 2 in the morning in the hotel doorway. The full reading look, and whatever she saw in his face made her step back and let him in without speaking. He sat on the couch. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands and stayed like that for a moment. Not performing anything, just letting the last 18 hours decompress. She sat in the chair across from him. She didn't say anything. She waited with the specific quality of someone who understood that some things needed the space of silence to surface. He lifted his face. He looked at her. "It's handled," he said. "The documentation stays with Lim, but he won't deploy it. Yoon comes back to the table tomorrow. The Eastern Corridor will take 3 weeks to fully stabilize, but there's a path." He paused. "Nayeon is out of Busan. She's safe." Amara looked at him. "And Tai Su?" He was quiet for a moment. "That conversation is tomorrow." She nodded. She didn't push on it, which he was grateful for. Some things needed to stay in their own time. "He wanted to use you," Jae-hyun said. "Lim. In the room. He wanted your name as a term in the agreement." She held his gaze. Steady. "I took it off the table," he said. Something moved in her face. Not surprise, she was processing the cost of what he had just told her, the specific nature of the concession, what it meant in the architecture of what had just been negotiated. She understood organizational logic. She knew what removing leverage cost. "What did you give up?" she said. "The photographs stay with him," Jae-hyun said. "He doesn't destroy them." A pause. "So he still has them?" "Yes." "Which means there's still exposure. For you." She held his gaze. "Because of the dinner, the connection to your grandmother. If those photographs surface publicly, the question of who Kang Jae-hyun brought into that restaurant becomes part of the story." "Yes," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. He let her look. He was done managing what she saw. "You traded your protection for mine," she said. "I took your name out of a criminal negotiation," he said. "That's what I did. The exposure is mine to manage." She was quiet. He could see her working through it. The specific quality of her thinking process that he had now watched across 2 dinners, an early morning crisis, and 4 hours of document preparation, and that had the particular characteristic of going very deep and very fast and arriving at conclusions that were structurally sound rather than emotionally convenient. "That was a costly move," she said. "Yes." "For someone you've known 11 days. He looked at her. He thought about all the true things he could say and the order in which they could be said, and the gap between what was honest and what was earned, and how in every other context in his life he had never struggled with that calculation because there had never been a situation where honesty was the more dangerous choice. "I've known you long enough," he said. The room was very quiet. Outside the apartment windows, Seoul was doing its late afternoon thing, the light shifting, the traffic building toward the evening density, the city's indifferent continuity that he had spent 20 years moving through as though he owned it rather than merely occupied it. Amara looked at him. Her face was open in the way it had been at the restaurant, when he had said the thing about buildings that made you feel expected, and something had moved between them in the space of a sentence. The same quality now, the specific feeling of 2 people who have been circling a true thing and have just arrived at it simultaneously. "I'm still flying out Saturday," she said. "I know. My life is in New York, my company, my people." She held his gaze. "I'm not a woman who rearranges her life because something interesting happened in Seoul." "I'm not asking you to rearrange anything," he said. "What are you asking?" He thought about it honestly. Not strategically. Honestly, which was still new enough to require effort. "I'm asking whether what happened here, all of it, the airport, the dinner, last night, whether that's something you walk away from on Saturday or something that has a different shape." She looked at him for a long moment. "That depends," she said. "On what?" "On whether you understand what you're actually asking for," she said. "Because you're not asking me to date you. You're asking me to consider building something with a man who runs an organization that operates in spaces I don't fully see, who has enemies who put surveillance photographs of me in shipping containers, who kept his second-in-command in the dark about a 14-year betrayal until it almost cost everything. She paused. That's not a simple ask. No, he said, it isn't. And I'm not a simple woman. I know that, he said. I knew that in the airport. I chose not to act like I did, and that was the worst decision I've made in a very long time. Something shifted in her face. Not softening exactly, more like the removal of a specific tension that had been there since the airport, since the moment he had looked at her and decided in 3 seconds what she was worth. Not gone. Removed from the front of things. The airport, she said. I want to say something about that, and then I want to be done with it. He held still. What you said to me. I've heard versions of it my whole life, from men and from women. People who looked at my body and decided it was an argument. She held his gaze without flinching. I built a company, an actual company with people who depend on it, on the exact opposite principle. That the space you take up is not a problem to be solved. That you don't make yourself smaller so the world can be more comfortable. She paused. And then you said what you said and I walked away, and I want you to know that I walked away without letting it break anything in me. But I want you to know it landed. That it had weight, that I'm not someone who hears that and feels nothing. I know, he said. Do you? Yes. He met her eyes. Not the way I knew it when I apologized at the restaurant. I know it differently now. After last night, after watching you sit at a kitchen table at 2 a.m. and make my organization's containment strategy better in 40 minutes when you had every right to get on the first flight out. He paused. What I said to you was about what I was carrying that day. It had nothing to do with what you are. And what you are, what I've watched you be in 11 days, is the most structurally sound person I've encountered in 20 years of working with people. She was quiet for a moment. Then, with the particular quality of someone allowing something to land fully rather than deflecting it. That's a strange compliment. You're a strange situation, he said. She almost smiled. The almost smile that he had been cataloging, the one that started somewhere in her eyes before it reached her mouth, the one that was more honest than a full smile because it wasn't for performance. Saturday is in 36 hours, she said. Yes. What do you do with 36 hours? He looked at her. He thought about the operational answer, the list of things the next 36 hours required. Yoon, Tae-soo, the Eastern Corridor stabilization, the MAPO board documentation. All of it real, all of it pressing. Whatever you want to do with them, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she reached for her notebook and closed it. She stood up. She went to the kitchen and poured 2 cups of coffee from what remained in the pot and brought them back and set one in front of him and held the other and stood at the window and looked out at Seoul. He sat and watched her watch his city. Show me one thing, she said. Not a business district. Not somewhere that's about what you are here. Somewhere that's just Seoul. Now? It's 4 p.m, she said. We're both still alive. Yes, now. He thought about it. He knew the city the way he knew the organization, by its structure, its pressure points, its hidden architecture. He knew which streets moved money and which didn't. He knew the view from 40 floors. He knew the places that were built to impress. He knew one place he had not been in years, a market near Gwangjang, small and permanent and entirely indifferent to who entered it, where the food was made the same way it had been made for decades, and the light in the afternoon came through the awnings at an angle that made everything look like it had already survived everything it needed to survive. Get your coat, he said. They went. He did not bring the driver. He flagged a cab on the street like a civilian, which he had not done in longer than he could accurately remember, and they sat in the back of an ordinary Seoul taxi while the driver played trot music softly and took them through the Jongno traffic without hurry. Amara looked out the window. She didn't fill the silence with conversation. She watched Seoul the way she had watched everything, with complete attention, cataloging without performing a reaction. At Gwangjang, the afternoon market was doing what it always did, organized and loud and smelling of sesame and hot oil and the particular cold-cut air of early winter. They walked through it slowly. She stopped at a bindaetok stall and watched the vendor press the batter onto the griddle with complete focused confidence, the motion so practiced it had become reflex, and something in her face went warm in a way he hadn't seen before, pure, uncomplicated pleasure. She bought one. She ate it standing at the stall in her coat with a paper napkin, and she made a sound of genuine surprise at the taste, and Jae-hyun stood beside her and watched and felt something he did not have an existing word for. Not happiness exactly, something quieter than that, something that had the quality of recognition, of arriving somewhere he had not known he was trying to reach. He bought one too. He ate it standing next to her. They did not talk about Lim or Taesu or the Eastern Corridor. They talked about the market, its age, its layout, how it had survived the development pressure around it. She asked questions that were architectural in nature, about the structural logic of how it had organized itself over decades. He knew some answers and didn't know others, which was unusual enough that he said so. "You don't know everything about your own city," she said. Not an accusation. Observation. "I know the parts I needed," he said. She looked at him. "That's very honest." "I'm working on honest," he said. She looked at him for a moment and then looked back at the market and said, "So am I." They stayed for an hour. When they left, the afternoon light was thinning toward evening and the streets around Jongno were filling with the after-work density. In the cab back, she was quiet again, watching the city, and he sat beside her and did the same, and between them there was a quality of silence that was different from any silence he had been in. Not the silence of two people avoiding something, but the silence of two people who had been through enough in a short stretch of time to have earned the right to simply be in the same space without filling it. He settled the Yoon situation the next morning. He called from the Kang Group office, the regular office, the one in the tower with the floor-to-ceiling windows. Yoon answered with the careful warmth of a man who had backed away from an alliance and was now unsure of the temperature of the room he'd left. Jae-hyun kept it clean and direct. The Daegu meeting would happen, the terms would be as originally discussed, and the interference from Lim's network was resolved. Yoon asked no questions about Lim. He accepted the framework. The Thursday meeting was rescheduled for the following week. After he hung up, he sat at his desk for a moment in the late morning light. Then he called Tae-soo. The conversation took 40 minutes. Jae-hyun did not record it. He did not have Minho present. It was between two men who had built something together over 14 years and were now sitting with the specific damage that is done not by enemies, but by the impossible choices that people who are not evil make when they are desperate. He listened to Tae-soo for a long time. Tae-soo spoke about Na-yeon, about the months of managing the fear of what Lim would do if the information stopped, about the specific mechanics of compromising yourself one small step at a time until the small steps have assembled into something you can't see over. "I didn't stop being who I was," Tae-soo said at one point. His voice was rough with the particular roughness of a man who had slept maybe 3 hours. "That's what I kept telling myself. I'm still myself. I'm just protecting her." But somewhere in there, those two things stopped being different. Jae-hyun was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. "Do you?" Tae-soo said. Not challenging, tired. "I know what it's like to convince yourself that the thing you're protecting justifies the shape you take while you're protecting it." He paused. "I've been doing that for 20 years. Not with files. With people. With the way I talk to them. With the things I decide it's acceptable to say." A beat. "I told a woman in an airport that she took up too much space. Because I was carrying something that morning that had nothing to do with her, and I told myself that was just pressure. Just how the day was going." He let that sit. "It's not different in kind, Tae-soo, just in scale." A long silence. "What happens now?" Tae-soo said. "You stepped back from operational access for 6 months, Jae-hyun said. "Full audit of the accounts you managed. Minho covers the gap. After the audit, we talk about what comes next." He paused. "Na-yeon stays in Seoul if she wants. Under watch for her own safety until Lim's people accept that she's no longer useful pressure." Tae-soo didn't say thank you. He was too honest a man to perform gratitude for consequences that were still costly. He said, "I'll make it right." Yes, Jae-hyun said. You will. He paused. That's why I'm not done with you. He hung up. He sat at his desk for a while. He looked at the city outside, the permanent, indifferent, beautiful sprawl of it. He thought about 20 years. He thought about what you built and what you destroyed and how the two were so often the same motion, the same hand, the same decision made at different angles. He thought about Amara. She was leaving in the morning. Her flight was at 7:40. She had sent him a message in the afternoon, a photograph actually, which surprised him. She was standing in the Seongsu-dong development space for her client presentation, the one she'd been working on, and the light in the photograph came through the unfinished walls at the same angle as the market the day before. She hadn't written anything with it, just the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. He texted back, "How did the presentation go?" She replied after 20 minutes, "They approved the full scope. We start in March." He typed, "Congratulations." She replied, "Thank you for yesterday. The market." He held the phone. He thought about what to write. He had spent his entire adult life in a world where the right words were the ones that gave nothing away, that preserved leverage, that closed down interpretation, that kept the speaker in a position that could not be used against him. He typed, "I haven't eaten standing up in a market in probably 15 years. I'd forgotten what that felt like." A pause. Then, what did it feel like? He looked at that question for a long time. Then he typed, "Human." The response took a minute. Then, "Yeah, it did." He went to the airport. He had not told her he was coming. He went because there were still things that needed to be said in person, and because sending them by text at 6 in the morning felt like the version of him that had existed before the airport in Incheon 11 days ago. The one who managed proximity from a safe distance and called it discipline. The departures hall at Incheon was the same as always. Bright, moving, the specific quality of a space where arrivals and departures happen simultaneously and the air carries both. He found her at check-in, just finishing. She turned and saw him and stopped. She looked at him. Not the reading look this time. Something quieter than that. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I know," he said. They stood in the departures hall at 6:20 in the morning with the airport moving around them. The same airport, the same kind of light, the same tile floors. Not the same two people. "What you did in that meeting," she said, taking my name off the table. "I know what I did." "I want to say it matters," she said, "not because it changes what you are or what I walked into in Seoul, but because it tells me something." She looked at him. "You made a costly choice. Knowing the cost. That's different from a man who makes easy choices and calls them noble." He held her gaze. "I'm not a man who makes easy choices," he said. "I make choices I can live with. That one I could live with." "Good," she said, "because so can I." A beat of silence. The airport kept moving around them. "March," he said. "The Seongsu-dong project starts in March." She looked at him. She understood what he was saying. "Seoul in March is cold," she said. "I know," he said. "I've lived here my whole life." "I'll need someone who knows where to eat standing up," she said. "I know a market," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Not the almost smile, the full one this time, the one that was not for performance, the one that started somewhere true and arrived at her face because it had nowhere else to go. She picked up her bag. She had a flight to catch. "Jae-hyun," she said. He looked at her. "You're a work in progress," she said. "I want you to know I see that. The airport, the dinner, last night, the meeting, all of it is in the same picture, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't." She held his gaze. "But the direction you're moving in is the right direction, and that matters more to me than where you started." He had no practiced response for that. He had nothing in the infrastructure of 20 years that had prepared him for being seen that clearly by someone who was choosing to stay in the frame anyway. "I'm aware," he said, "that I'm a long way from deserving what you just said." "Also true," she said. "Work on it." She walked toward the departures gate. He stood in the terminal and watched her go, and this time, unlike the first time 11 days ago, when he had watched a woman walk away from him and felt the pebble in the shoe of something he could not name, this time he knew exactly what he was watching. He was watching something begin. The airport moved around him, indifferent and permanent, and Kang Jae-hyun stood in the middle of it and felt the specific weight of a man who has spent 20 years building things that were supposed to last and has only just understood what the word lasting actually requires. It required the thing he had said to her in a text at 6 in the evening in a city that had taught him everything except how to be human. It required standing in a market in the afternoon light and eating something ordinary and feeling, for the first time in 15 years, like the ground beneath him was made of something real. Outside the terminal, Seoul was doing what it always did. He went back to it, not as the man who had walked through it a week ago, cold and calibrated and carrying cruelty he called discipline. As something in progress, something that had been cracked open by apple juice and a chocolate bar, and a woman who refused, with absolute consistency, to be less than what she was. He had a meeting with his board at 10. He had a call with Minho at noon. He had, in March, a city to show someone who already knew how to build places where people felt expected. He walked out into the Incheon morning and breathed the cold air and thought about what it would mean to rebuild, not the organization, not the Eastern Corridor, not the Mapo development or the Daegu Alliance. Those would get rebuilt. That was just work. He meant himself. The work of that was slower, less structured, without measurable outcomes or documented governance or the particular clarity of problems that could be solved by applying the right amount of force in the right direction. It was the hardest kind of construction. He had been in harder rooms. He started walking.